Hi, and welcome to the show. Well, today I have with me an important person in our community. She is the Development Director of YCAP, Laverne Pitts. Now, for those who don't know, the Development Director is the one that's responsible to bring in the money, to keep it solvent, to keep it going. And there's a lot of issues with that these days, so I thought Laverne might want to tell us about how that's going for YCAP and how the pandemic is affecting them and the program in general. So Laverne, thank you so much for being here. I see you're at home.
Mm-hmm.
Something to do
Yes.
with a pandemic we're having?
Yes, social
Yeah.
distancing as best we can while still doing our work. So
Good, good. Well,
definitely.
I want you to tell us more about that and how that's working at the YCAP building and how the warehouse is operating and all that. But maybe we can start with a little bit about you. How did you come to McMinnville, or were you raised here, or where'd you start out?
Well, I actually grew up in San Antonio, Texas, on a small farm that my family had been in the family for about 150 years. But San Antonio grew and decided to gobble it up. So at that point, I became a little more nomadic, so I moved. I moved up to Oregon, where my husband actually was from originally. And he was from Eugene, and we met while in college at Trinity University, which is where I went to school for my undergraduate graduate work at University of Texas at Austin. But he'd been talking about Oregon, and we'd come up and visited a lot, and I fell in love. And so in the early 2000s, I moved up to Corvallis, and I was the executive director for the Corvallis Public Schools Foundation. And I was there for about 5 years, but then my dad got very sick down in San Antonio and I needed to return back home. And so I was then in San Antonio for about 7 years. I was the development and marketing director for Texas Public Radio for 7 years in San Antonio. And then after my dad passed, got divorced, life kind of threw me a few, not so fun days. And I decided that New Orleans would be a good palate cleanse because if you're going to have some fun, where do you go? You go to New Orleans. And so I spent 5 years in New Orleans, worked with Catholic Charities there, did a lot of disaster relief funding after floods. And other natural disasters, as well as regular fundraising for all the 30 different programs that Catholic Charities, many of which are similar to what YCAP does. Then after a few years there, I decided I want to try and make my way back to the Pacific Northwest. After a brief stop in Tacoma, I managed to make it back to McMinnville because I always wanted to get back to small town Oregon, and that was my goal. And YCAP seemed like a great fit. I really enjoyed my time at Catholic Charities. So,
Wow, that is
yeah.
quite a journey. I must say I am impressed. You have been at the center and the leader of a lot of wonderful public work. Well, thank you for that. And I feel lucky that we have you here in McMinnville with all that background and talent. So
Thank you.
wonderful.
I'm
And
happy to be here.
well, I've got to brag a little bit and say, and we're in the same Rotary Club,
Yes, we are.
Sunrise Rotary, and we're lucky to have you there too. So,
Yeah.
well, okay. Well, on to the thick of it. What's the first on your mind when you get up in the morning as a development director of YCAP?
Well, the first thing is at this point, what we're doing is we're doing a lot of federal grant work at the moment. Early on in the crisis, we were really reaching out to the community to help fill the gap that we knew existed between when the need happened and when the federal money was going to start showing up. So for those first couple of months, we really reached out to the community to help us out from about mid-March up until about a couple of weeks ago. Really, it was local contributions that stepped up and stepped in for us here in the community that helped us expand the food bank to a second warehouse and do a lot of the great work of helping individuals who are experiencing homelessness receive shelter. So there was a lot of public help that really stepped in to help expand the service. Now that some of the federal CARES money is coming in, there's a lot of reporting and a lot of requirements that come with those funds. And so right now we're working on all of back end of that.
The paperwork, the cleanup.
The paperwork,
Oh,
and making sure we submit our program and our plans and our budgets and all that stuff. Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, when you say you help people, try to tide them over until maybe unemployment came, things like that.
Mhm.
We know you help people with food. Do you help people with rent and utilities and things like that as well?
Absolutely. Utilities is a big part of our program, and in fact, we have quite a bit of funding available in the utility program, especially the energy assistance. Um, since we had such a mild winter, we ended up not utilizing all of our LIHEAP funds, and so we do have a considerable amount of that available in order for us to help people now. So, and in particular, that fund, it really looks at income within the last 30 days. So even if you made considerably more at the beginning of the year, if you haven't within the last 30 days, you can apply for that. So that you just go to ycap.org, you look up energy, there's an online form that can be filled out, and people can immediately start the process. That will help cover electricity bills, and also all sorts of heating bills, gas bills, even wood or other heating sources. And it's kind of important to do that before you get a disconnect notice. It's a lot, we don't need a disconnect notice. Doing it ahead of time is really the best approach.
Well, that's a wonderful invitation for people that may be hearing this and know of someone that needs help with their utility bill.
And
Okay.
then the rental assistance is something that we're receiving we're going to be receiving here very shortly. We've just received word from the state of Oregon of what our allocation will be on that. And then Providence actually came through with a generous grant as well to help with rental assistance for people who, once this is over and they might find themselves in a hole from where they were before, they'll be able to apply. And that they can apply at anydoorYamhill.org. And that goes to one of our intake individuals in client services and housing, and they decide which program is the best one to try and serve that person's need. But it's a one-stop location for anybody who needs homeless services, rental assistance, preventing homelessness, any of that is anydoorYamhill.org.
Say that website again, or that email address.
So anydoorYamhill.org.
Any door.
Any
Yam.
door. Or they can go to our YCAP.org and look up housing, and it'll direct them to any door as well. So,
Well, I heard in your response about being development director, you have seems like two hats you wear. One is local money, community money. You call up those donors, you send them emails, you send them letters, you have fundraisers, not exactly maybe right now. And that seems to be a job in itself. And then you have this other thing of grants with all these, maybe many federal agencies, state agencies that you're in that you're applying for grants and then following up with paperwork. So you do both of those things?
well, the grant piece of it is somewhat fairly new to me. Most of that has been with the program directors. But
Mhm.
as you can imagine, right now, the program directors are a bit overwhelmed with the other work that they're doing. And COVID, each one of our funds that we receive federal funding for, we're essentially now receiving a grant on top of that that's specific for COVID. So I've really been heavily involved with the COVID piece, because those other grants tend to be multi-year, and they were written before, but the COVID is now something, and typically they're being given to us with very short time frames. So for example, we receive notification, and then within 30 days we have to give them a narrative, a budget narrative, and how we're going to spend the funds. And so I'm working with the program directors to figure that part out and send that in.
Well, I'm grateful to have your time today. It sounds like it's hard to fit all that in. Um, Tell me, you said that the program directors are overwhelmed. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about who those program directors are, what they're directing, and why they're overwhelmed.
Right. Well, right now, for example, Craig, Craig Ludwig has been with the organization for many years, and he is over both the food bank as well as the energy services department. And as you can imagine, the food bank has expanded services tremendously. Part of that is working with all the partner pantries and meal sites, but it's also working with the Oregon Food Bank. When Oregon Food Bank received the funding from the state that they did, they pushed some of that down locally to ask us to do some of the buying. And so we've been very involved with that end as well right now, is buying food locally. In fact, we've gone to some of our local food producers and have bought from them directly. And so that's something we don't typically do, because normally we can buy all of our food through the Oregon Food Bank, but they said that they weren't really capable of doing that right now. We could buy some of it through them, but not all of it, because there was just so much that needed to get out into the public. So as part of that, we also set up a secondary warehouse operation, which was originally at Mac Market. They very generously donated their location, but we quickly outgrew that, and we're now at the MV Advancements warehouse, which is over in the industrial area. And so we've had to move warehouse, we've had to set up the secondary warehouse and now move it. So that's considerable amount. And then with energy services, a lot of that's organizing. Some of the people who were in our weatherization program have been helpful in moving those warehouses and setting up those warehouses, because the weatherization program had to take a hiatus. So he's very involved with that. Mandy, who's currently leading client services and housing, she has been just doing amazing work in terms of keeping organized with all the case managers and having them continue their work with clients, as well as building the whole motel program, which she did with Alexandra.
How do they keep in touch with clients? You know, you have an intake program at YCAP where people come in and sit down in an office with a client worker, but now how do you do that?
Yeah, we basically do everything virtually. So everything is over the phone with clients rather than being in person. We receive referrals through a variety of different mechanisms. The county refers people to us, county health, as well as hospitals, specifically for the motel program, which has been an expansion of service. Most of the rest of the people we had already been sending through Any Door Yamhill, just because that provided a screening opportunity before they came in and met with the case manager. And so now what's happening is, instead, that all that work's being done virtually over the phone and in conversations with case managers.
So this anydooryamhill.org is a place to start your intake. You maybe go there first to fill out the information,
yes.
and then from there you will be contacted.
Yes.
Rather than calling on the phone, they'll call. If you call on the phone, they'll tell you to go to anydooryamhill.org to get started. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much, because that's the best way for us to manage the workflow. So then those get sent to our individual who's in charge of that, and then she goes through and then says, okay, this one is a veteran. Okay, great, this can go to our SSVF program. And so then she passes that off to the case manager who's working with veterans. Or if it's somebody who is currently on the street, then that goes to our street outreach person. If it's somebody who's maybe going to be missing a payment on their rent and they're concerned, that goes to a different individual. So she can kind of triage it and decide which person it goes to based on the information that that individual provides, because everybody's situation is different. And there are different programs. If you're medically fragile, there's a specific program for that. So it helps to have all that information at the beginning, then, so that you're working with the right person right from the start.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, you mentioned Mandy. Her program is what again?
Well, she is currently the lead on the client services and housing.
And housing.
So,
okay.
And housing. So all the homelessness, all of that work is under that department.
How do you do outreach to homeless people now?
Well, right now it's a little challenging. And so we're working with the county health on a lot of that. We actually, with the help of the Give a Little Foundation, bought some hand washing stations that are being placed throughout the county. We also created some cards with some information on how to access services, attach some hand sanitizer to it, and then, sent that out to groups that were going and meeting with people. And also at our food bank locations, that's where where people are picking up food and congregate meal sites and things of that nature, is where they can also get information about our services.
remind me of those other locations. I know there's one in Willamina. Remind me where those are.
Oh, there's about 30 of them all
Oh,
throughout.
wow.
So if you go to yamhillcap.org/food, there's a whole listing of every community. So we're in Amity, we're in Yamhill, we've got several in Newburgh, several in McMinnville, Sharamina, Grand Sharamina down in Sheridan. So we're a lot of different places.
Now, how do you engage with those locations? Do you just show up at the door? What will happen if you do that? Do you need to go through an intake process before you get food? How does that work?
Well, the food process is very different depending on the individual food pantry and meal site. So best thing to do is to give them a call. Or yes, I mean, some of them you just show up. I mean, like St. Barnabas Soup Kitchen is one of our meal sites. And so it depends on which ones they are and how they operate. They, the best thing is to go to the nearest one to you because we don't want people traveling in between. So whichever one is closest to them is the one that they would sort of start that process at.
Now, I guess these are considered essential services, so they've been open. The people in these, like at the soup kitchen, everybody's wearing a mask and lots of sanitizer being sprayed around, and oh my gosh, it's pretty intense, I would think, to have a room full of people.
Oh, well, we're not doing it like that.
Okay.
How
That's
it's happening is it's all to go. So they're putting together to go, and people are showing up and receiving to go meals.
I see.
So what we've been doing is supplying the to-go containers to a lot of these meal sites. So we just actually had a generous donor give us like 4,000 to-go containers because the meal sites have been asking us. It was hard to source those right now, as you can imagine. And so just whenever we can find them, and we've had some people who've given us to-go containers.
Well, I saw a group of people will show up at St. Barnabas Kitchen and cook that food. Is that right?
Yeah.
And well, they're one of these frontline heroes, I would imagine.
They are absolutely.
Witnessing there.
Absolutely. And then, there's been a lot of the volunteers that have reached out to YCAP. We've actually directed them to the food pantries and meal sites because for a long time, or for several of them, their volunteers have been older, and because older people are at a much higher risk with COVID, many of them have had to be really not volunteer as much. And so anytime somebody has contacted YCAP, while we would love to have volunteers at the moment, because we're trying to maintain a small group of people in the building and a small group of people in a distribution warehouse, we want to make sure that there isn't a possibility of something coming into that distribution warehouse. And so because of that, we've really been asking volunteers to assist more at the pantry and meal site level.
I see. Okay. Now back on warehouses, you've grew out of one extra warehouse at the Mac Market and are now in the MD Advancement. Is that like a doubling of your warehouse space? The site at MD Advancements?
I'm not quite sure the exact square footage, but it's definitely increased our capacity. So what that one is doing in particular is we're building food boxes there. And so food boxes for both the partner pantries as well as for our motel program. And so we're creating pallets of 40 food boxes per pallet. And so then what can happen is a pantry or meal site, or more a pantry than a meal site, but pantries can call us and say, hey, we're really low on food. We've had twice as many people show up than what we expected. Can you bring us some, an extra couple of pallets of food boxes? And so we can put those on the back of a truck and send those out to one of our food pantries. And that way they have what they need.
And I guess the reason for these boxes is because at the pantries, you don't want people coming into the pantry to shop like they did before. They're
Correct.
handed a box out on the sidewalk, perhaps.
Exactly, or in the trunk of your car. So a lot of them have set it up where people drive up and they put the food in the car and then they can go. That way it's very low touch in terms of interaction between people.
Well, that's a lot of labor on the front end, where before shoppers would come in and,
Okay.
put things into a bag and carry them out. Now you're having to assemble that all. YCAP's having to do that assembly, and you're doing it in that warehouse where it would be advancements. So there's probably quite a few people doing that in that warehouse.
Well, you'd be surprised. We luckily have a good crew of about 4 or 5 individuals
Uh-huh.
who pretty much that's their job now. And these were individuals who worked in other departments that currently can't do their job. So we've
Uh-huh.
reallocated. We haven't had to lay anybody off
Cool.
because what we've done is we've reassigned people. So, for example, my development assistant works from home 3 days a week. And then 2 days she goes over and she helps. So she does the thank yous and the letters and all of the appreciation. And then 2 days a week she goes over and helps at the warehouse. And so it's an opportunity for her then to go do that work. And at the same time making sure that we're really, because normally we would have been planning a special event right now. Obviously we're not planning a special event right now. So she has a little bit of extra time. And so she goes and she makes food boxes at that other location. We're also keeping the crews separate between the 2 warehouses. So the warehouse crew that's at the main YCAP food bank is different than the warehouse crew that's at the other location. And the reason for that is to create redundancy in the system. That if, heaven forbid, anybody became sick inside one of those warehouses, we could still operate the other warehouse without without having a problem. And so then we would just do a deep clean on the one warehouse. Luckily, nobody has, but it provides that level of redundancy between the 2 teams.
Wow. Okay, this is quite a shift in your system, and
Mhm.
it must have taken a lot of quick thinking on how to make these adjustments. Things look a
Oh,
lot
there were
different.
a lot of meetings.
A lot of meetings on Zoom. Maybe give me an idea of the increase in food. Have you doubled your food, the food that comes and goes through YCAP? Do you have an idea?
Well, I know that, yeah, it's at least double.
At
It's
least
at least
double.
double. At least double. Probably more than that, but it's hard to gauge because I haven't been in the office. I go in on Mondays, we have meetings, and then I have 1 day a week that I'm not there. And of course, I'm not allowed in the warehouse because I don't need to be in there. So, so actually seeing, and a lot of our food does still come from the USDA. It's hard to see what the ramp up has been on that. There certainly has been a lot more purchasing of food than what we've ever done in the past. That's been significant because there just wasn't enough coming in through USDA and our normal mechanisms. As you can imagine, one of our big sources of food is actually a program that we call Fresh Alliance, which is food that's at the grocery stores that they then end up selling. And so when it gets close to expiration, they give it to us. Well, as you can imagine, the first couple of months of this, there wasn't a lot of that left over at the grocery stores
Oh,
because
wow.
the food was sold. So, there wasn't extra produce. There weren't extra cans of food that were going to be past the expiration date. There wasn't extra bags of flour, any of those sorts of things that we would normally receive from our Fresh Alliance partners, which is
Mhm.
Safeway, Albertsons, Winco, Ross, all those grocery stores. We normally pick up every week from them food that is getting close to its expiration date. Well, the first few parts of this, there wasn't any. So
Wow. An
we
additional
had to do a
challenge
lot
on
more
top,
food buying.
challenge on top of challenge.
Yeah, yeah, it
Now,
was it was a lot.
just to be clear, you say the food is near expiration date. You aren't able to, are you able to give food out that is beyond expiration date?
Well, it depends on the food. We have a separate listing from Feeding America of the actual. So, for example, cans. They may have a date on the can that's a best by date. Well, that
Best
isn't
Buy.
necessarily the date. It's the best by date, but it's
Got
not
it.
the okay to eat by date. And so we have a separate listing for that. We do, of course, check cans for dents or, if they're in any way compromised.
Mhm.
And other items are like that as well. Usually, milk or eggs can go, a few days or a week past. It depends on the product and depends on how well it was stored. So, and that's the reason why we do a lot of these pickups are refrigerated trucks.
I guess that is a
So we
tricky
can make sure
question,
that they're
isn't it?
well
That is a tricky question. Best buy, um, purchase buy.
stored.
There's
Hmm.
different ways that these things are printed and how you deal with that. I guess you have it all figured out, but
Yeah,
because you have to provide food that is nutritious and safe.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, we've talked about two of the directors, Mandy and who was the other
And
one?
Craig.
And
Yeah.
Craig.
Well, and Craig's over two of the programs.
And one of his programs is kind of closed down, the weatherization for now.
Well, weatherization, but the energy is also under him, and so that's going
Oh,
strong. Energy and
yeah,
weatherization go together,
yeah.
and so energy is of course, we're taking applications right now, processing
Yes.
those virtually, and making sure all that. We're asking people to drop them off at our front so that it's contactless. So in our mailbox out on the front, we're asking people. And
So, and
then
Mandy with client services, we talked about that. Is there another program we haven't talked about?
yeah, youth outreach. Youth outreach. Mark is currently our lead on youth outreach, and that's in Newburgh primarily in the drop-in center. But we of course do services across the whole county. We have apartments for individuals who are between the age of 16 and 22. That are transitional living environments in case they are homeless youth. We can make sure that they have a place to stay. We also have what's known as a safe shelter program, where we
Hmm.
have homes across the county where youth can stay for up to 21 days. And if they are a runaway youth and they need a location and a safe place to be. Our first goal is always family reunification, if possible, to have a youth go back with their family or find a family member that they're comfortable with.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of work that's going on with that right now. We anticipate that actually ramping up quite a bit once this crisis has passed a little bit, because we do know that the incidents of domestic violence and just the stress of the current situation, we're probably going to see an uptick in that area coming out of this. So we're currently ramping that up. We did receive some additional COVID funding from the federal government for for both of those programs, and so we're working on trying to establish and maybe hire an additional person in to help with that process. So,
That sounds like I'm looking for the word, that program of dealing with runaway youth, homeless youth, reunited, reuniting with family or some other family member. This is very intense social work, I guess, is
yes.
what I'm talking about. And you have those social workers working at YCAP, or do you have another agency that helps you with that?
Both. So we have counseling services that we actually have, that we bring in counselors that work with youth. And then we also have some of our youth experience. Some of our people who work in our office have lived experience. And so, and we're involved with our drop-in center for, since they were kids.
Wow.
And so there's some of both because you want to make sure that teens feel comfortable that the person that they're talking to is authentic and understands what it is that they're going through. And at the same time, you want to also have that trauma-informed care for a lot of these kids who may have experienced trauma in their house or in their environment. So we work really hard to sort of reach teens where they are and start. Now it's been a little challenging because we haven't been able to do our drop-in center. So we're hoping that now that the county's reopened, we can start reopening that soon. But we're going to have a lot of protocols in place before we can have that resource back fully.
Well, Laverne, I am amazed to see that we've already been talking a half an hour.
It's
And
fast.
so that's the time slot that they give me on Greenville Community Media.
Yeah.
So we haven't gone everywhere, but I think we've hit the high points.
Mhm.
I think people are in much, I think I am a greater understanding of what you do and how you've adapted, and I'm very impressed. And I'm very grateful for you being here today to tell us about it.
Thank
And I
you.
wish you all the best. I'm glad to hear you have an assistant. Uh, and
She's part-time, but hey,
uh,
I'll take it.
yes.
She's great.
Well, thank you for what you do for the community and your dedication, and especially in this difficult time. And thank you for being here to talk to us about it today.
Sure. Thank you so much. Have a great
All
day.
right. I'll see you at the next Rotary Zoom call.
Absolutely.
All right.